Almost everybody in Britain knows the name Lord Lucan. He is a punchline over there, the answer to a crossword clue, the joke you make when somebody cannot be found. I assumed I knew the story. A rich man killed the wrong woman and ran. That is the version I had carried around for years, and it is the version most of the documentaries tell. Then I read the actual records, and the thing that stopped me was not the disappearance at all. It was the money. A man walked out of a house in Sussex at 1:15 in the morning on November 8th, 1974. He had already lost everything of his own that he could lose. Not in a crash, not in a bad investment. He lost it slowly, over 14 years, in a gaming club in Mayfair founded by his closest friend. Two men who worked inside that club later said in print that the games there had been fixed. Others who knew the place have called that a lie. I will lay out both positions when we get there, and I will not pretend the question is settled, because it is not. What is settled is the arithmetic. By the autumn of 1974, he had 4 bank accounts, and every one of them was overdrawn. That is the story I want to tell. Not a man who snapped, a man who was emptied out in a room full of dukes, and who, by his own account to friends, had started thinking about his wife as a way out. He got it wrong. The woman who came up the basement stairs first was 29 years old. She had 2 sons she had given up. She was only in that house that night because she had swapped her evening off with somebody else. Her name was Sandra Rivet, and almost nobody says it. I have covered the British aristocracy on this channel before. The Mitford sisters, Wallis Simpson, Edwina Mountbatten. Every one of those had a shape I recognized. This one does not. There is no reckoning at the end. Nobody stands trial. The only person ever formally accused vanishes into the dark of a Sussex lane, and the trail stops in the car park of a ferry town. The police that night began with a pub on a quiet street in Belgravia, and so does this. The pub on Lower Belgrave Street. A cup of tea. That is where it starts. It was the evening of November 7th, 1974. At around 5 minutes to 9, in a tall white house in Belgravia, a young woman asked her employer whether she would like one. The employer said yes. The young woman went down to the basement kitchen to make it. Lower Belgrave Street is not grand in the way the streets around it are grand. It runs from the corner of Eaton Square down toward the west front of Victoria Station. The houses along it are narrow, 4 and 5 stories of white stucco, with basement rooms below the level of the pavement. Number 46 sat about halfway down. Veronica, Countess of Lucan, lived there with her 3 children. She waited upstairs. The tea did not come. After a few minutes, she went down to the first floor landing, then to the top of the basement stairs, and she called into the dark. What happened next, she described to police that same night and repeated under oath 7 months later. And the account she gave both times was the same. A man came at her out of the stairwell. He hit her. She screamed, and he told her to shut up. And it was hearing him speak, she said, that told her who he was. She knew the voice. She had been married to it for 11 years. They fought on the landing. She bit his fingers. She kept fighting until he let go of her throat and gave up. The 2 of them ended up standing there in the dark at the top of her own basement stairs, both out of breath. She asked him where the nanny was. He was evasive at first. Then he told her he had killed her. What Veronica did in the next few minutes is the reason she lived. She told him she would help him. She said that if he stayed in the house a few days, until her injuries healed, she could get him away. He seemed to take it seriously. He went upstairs, found their older daughter Frances on the landing, and sent her back to bed. Then he took his wife into a bedroom and told her to lay towels down first, so she would not stain the sheets. He asked whether there were any barbiturates in the house. Then he went into the bathroom to wet a cloth, and Veronica worked out that he could not hear her from in there. She got off the bed, went down the stairs, out the front door, and ran. The Plumber's Arms stands at number 14, a few doors along on the same side of the street. It was an ordinary Thursday night in the bar. Somewhere near 9:45, the door opened and a woman came in covered from head to foot in blood. The landlord later told a coroner's court that she was shouting that she had just escaped being murdered and that her nanny was dead. Then she went into shock and somebody telephoned the police. The two officers who reached number 46 found the front door closed. They kicked it in. Inside, the area at the top of the basement stairs was heavily blood-stained. The pictures on the staircase wall hung crooked. A metal banister rail had been damaged. At the foot of the stairs, 2 cups and 2 saucers lay in a pool of blood. Near them was a large canvas sack. On the floor beside it lay a length of lead pipe, bound along its length in surgical tape. Above all of it, the light fitting in the basement had no bulb. A bulb was found close by, resting on a chair. When the laboratory tested it later, it worked perfectly. I have gone through the crime scene inventory more times than I want to admit, and that is the detail I keep returning to. A man does not unscrew a light bulb in a house he happens to be passing. Whoever waited at the bottom of those stairs made that room dark on purpose, and did it before anyone came down. The 2 cups tell you something else. She had asked for tea, and the nanny was making it for both of them. Veronica was taken to St. George's Hospital and sedated. A police officer was posted beside her bed in case the man came back. He did not come back. He was already on the telephone, twice, to 2 different people, and neither call was to the police. The club in Berkeley Square. In 1960, Parliament did something that changed the shape of London society, and almost nobody understood at the time what they had done. The Betting and Gaming Act made casino gambling legal in Britain for the first time in modern history. Before it, playing for high stakes meant a private house, a locked door, and the risk of prosecution. After it, a man with the right connections could open a club and hang a chandelier in it. He could take money off the aristocracy in a building with its own front door on a garden square. John Aspinall was that man. In 1962, he opened the Claremont Club at number 44 Berkeley Square. The building was a mid-18th century house by William Kent, with one of the great staircases in London rising through it. The founding membership was not a cross-section of anything. 5 dukes, 5 marquises, 20 earls, 2 cabinet ministers. One of them was Richard John Bingham, and at that point he was not yet an earl at all. He had left Eton with what his own mother called an academic record, far from creditable. He also left with a private income he had built himself, taking bets off other boys and putting the proceeds into an account nobody knew about. He did his national service with the Coldstream Guards in West Germany, where he learned poker. In 1954, he came home to a London merchant bank called William Brandt's Sons and Company on £500 a year. He lasted 6 years. What ended it was not the work. A colleague was promoted ahead of him, and at around the same time he won £26,000 in one night at Chemin de Fer. He resigned, and the reason he gave has been quoted ever since. "Why work in a bank?" he asked, when he could earn a year's money in a single night at the tables. What tends to get lost is that he could actually play. He was rated among the 10 best backgammon players in the world. He won the tournament at the St. James's Club. He took the championship of the West Coast of America. At bridge and at backgammon, games where thinking pays, he could beat almost any room he walked into. The trouble was that the real money did not move at those tables. It moved at chemin de fer, and chemin de fer rewards nothing but nerve. One night, he lost £8,000, roughly 2/3 of what the family trusts paid him in a whole year. At a casino on another occasion, he lost £10,000. That second debt was covered by his uncle by marriage, a stockbroker named John Bevan, and Lucan repaid him 2 years afterward. By 1968, he was running thoroughbreds and paying out more in race entry fees than he was taking home in prize money. Then there is the question of whether the club he played in was straight. The Claremont was never the machine Aspinall had wanted. Under the new law, he owed tax, and the house took only a table charge, which produced a fraction of what the old private games had. John Burke, the club's own financial director, and Bobby McHugh, an associate of the London gangster Billy Hill, both later said that Aspinall solved the problem by letting Hill in. What they described has a name: the Big Edge. Low cards went through a small mangle and were bent very slightly across their width. High cards were bent along their length. The packs were resealed and sent back, looking untouched. Hill's readers were introduced to the tables by Aspinall himself. They could tell from across the bays whether a card was high or low, which is described as giving them a 60-40 advantage over the room. Burke quit at the end of 1965, about a year in, and called the whole enterprise rotten from top to bottom. By his account, the scheme ran 2 years and was then closed down. Aspinall's family and friends have denied all of it. He was never charged with anything. The claims reached the public in a book by Douglas Thompson and a Channel 4 film in 2009. That was decades after the events, and both men had their own reasons for talking. So nobody can tell you that Lucan sat at a bent deck. What is documented is that he was one of the earliest members and that he played there through precisely those years. It is also documented that the club's own finance director accused its founder of running a fix on the membership. Having read both sides of it, I think the fraud question is almost beside the point. Whether or not the cards were bent, he spent his best years handing his money to a house that had every reason to keep him at the table. I have looked for a version of this story where he walks away, and I cannot find one. They had started calling him Lucky by then. Over his years at the tables, his losses ran ahead of his winnings, and the nickname stuck anyway. The woman he married. The wedding was at Holy Trinity, Brompton on November 20th, 1963. And the guest list is the first thing about this marriage that does not add up. Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, attended. One of her ladies-in-waiting had been a relation of the bride. Beyond that, the great names of London society largely stayed away. By one account from inside the church that day, a guest looked around the pews and remarked that there was nobody there. The engagement had run in the Times and the Daily Telegraph 5 weeks before. The groom was heir to an earldom, and the room was half empty. Nobody has ever fully explained those empty pews to me, and I have looked for an answer. The likeliest reading is the plainest one. He was marrying outside his circle, and the circle stayed at home. The bride was Veronica Mary Duncan, 26 years old, and she had come from nowhere near this world. She was born in Uckfield in Sussex in 1937. Her father, Major Charles Morehouse Duncan, was killed in a car accident while she was a child, and the family moved to South Africa. Her mother remarried. They returned to England, and her stepfather took over the management of a hotel in Guildford. She and her sister Christina were sent to St. Swithin's School in Winchester. Veronica could draw, and she went on to art college in Bournemouth. Afterward, the sisters shared a flat in London, where she worked first as a model and then as a secretary. Her way in was Christina. Her sister married William Shand Kidd, a man whose family money came from wallpaper and who moved easily in circles Veronica had never seen. That name is worth holding on to, because Bill Shand Kidd's half-brother Peter would later marry Frances Roche and become stepfather to a girl named Diana Spencer. These two families sit closer together than most people ever notice. Through the Shand Kidds, Veronica was invited to a function at a country golf club, and that is where she met John Bingham. They honeymooned in Europe, first class on the Orient Express. His father provided a marriage settlement intended to pay for a proper family house. He used it to clear some of what he owed and to buy number 46 Lower Belgrave Street, which he then had redecorated to her taste. 2 months after the wedding, on January 21st, 1964, his father died of a stroke. He became the 7th Earl of Lucan overnight, along with 3 lesser titles, and Veronica became a countess. He also came into an inheritance that has always been reported as roughly £250,000. That figure reaches us second-hand, and I would not stake much on the precision of it. The children arrived quickly. Francis was born in October of 1964, George followed 3 years later, and Camilla came in the summer of 1970. By then the family had moved properly into Lower Belgrave Street, a house that had cost £17,500, and the Earl settled into a routine that almost never varied. Breakfast at 9, letters, newspapers, some time at the piano, sometimes a walk with the Doberman, lunch at the Claremont and backgammon through the afternoon, home to change into black tie, then back to the club to gamble until the early hours, occasionally with his wife sitting alongside watching him do it. She kept accounts at a Savile Row tailor and at shops in Knightsbridge, and nobody told her what any of the rest of it was costing. In 1965, he had written down what he actually wanted: £2 million in the bank, cars, yachts, expensive holidays, security for the future. He said it would give him and a good many other people a great deal of pleasure. He never came close. What came instead was illness. After George was born, and again after Camilla, Veronica suffered severe depression following childbirth. Her husband involved himself in her treatment. In 1971, he took her to a psychiatric clinic in Hampstead, and she refused to be admitted. She agreed instead to see a psychiatrist at home and to take a course of antidepressants. That distinction matters more than anything else in this chapter. She was unwell, and she was under treatment. She was never diagnosed as insane, and the doctors he later consulted told him so directly. In July of 1972, the family went to Monte Carlo, and she came home alone, early, leaving him there with the 2 older children. That Christmas was tense. 2 weeks after it, he moved out into a small property in Eaton Row, and Veronica always dated the end of the marriage to January of 1973. The Watchers. A woman named Stefania Sawicka worked as a nanny at number 46 during the early months of 1973. She was 26. What she later told police is, to my mind, the hardest thing in the entire file to read. Her employer had confided in her. Veronica told Sawicka that her husband had struck her with a cane, and that on one occasion he had pushed her down the stairs. She said she was afraid of him, and she told the young woman not to be surprised if he killed her one day. That conversation took place 20 months before the night in the basement. Sawicka's time in the household ended in March of that year, and it ended on the pavement. She was out near Grosvenor Place with 2 of the children when Lucan appeared with 2 private detectives. They told her the children had been made wards of court and that she had to release them. She did. Francis was collected from school later the same day. That is what the separation had turned into by the spring of 1973. Not a divorce, a campaign. He had moved first to Eaton Row, then to a larger rented flat in Elizabeth Street, a 3-minute walk from the house he had left. Veronica made an early attempt at reconciliation and got nowhere. By that point, there was only one thing he still wanted out of the marriage, and it was the children. To get them, he needed her declared unfit to keep them, so he set about assembling the proof. His car was parked in Lower Belgrave Street so often that people on the street noticed it. When watching her himself was no longer enough, he hired a firm of private investigators to do the watching for him. He went from doctor to doctor, asking them to confirm that his wife had lost her mind, and the doctors kept telling him she had not. What she had was depression and anxiety, and those are not the same thing. Then he bought a small Sony tape recorder and began taping their telephone calls. He played selected passages of them to any friend who would sit still long enough to listen. That is the detail that tells you most about him. Recording your wife is one thing. Editing the recordings into a performance and carrying it around the clubs of Mayfair is something else entirely. I have covered a good many bad marriages on this channel. That is the first time I have come across a man who made an exhibit out of one. To those same friends, and to his bank manager, he described her as spending money like water. At the same time, he was closing off her supply. £40 a week was what he sent her. The family's standing food order with Harrods appears to have been cancelled. The milkman went unpaid, and payment to the childcare agency was allowed to slide. That last one mattered more than it sounds. The court required her to keep a live-in nanny in the house, starve the agency, and the nanny leaves. With no income of her own, the Countess of Lucan took a part-time job at a local hospital. The nannies came and went. Lillian Jenkins, who had been with the family for years, was dismissed in December of 1972. After her came a run of temporary staff, one of whom Lucan befriended and bought drinks for, while asking questions about the household. Another reported odd telephone calls to the house, some silent with breathing on the line, some from a man asking for people who did not exist. Into that house, in the second half of 1974, came Sandra Rivett. She was 29 years old, born in September of 1945, the third child of Albert and Eunice Hensby. The family emigrated to Australia when she was 2 and came back in 1955. Her school reports described her as intelligent, though not academically outstanding. She trained for 6 months as a hairdresser and then worked as a secretary in Croydon. After a relationship ended badly, she admitted herself as a voluntary patient to a hospital near Redhill, where she was treated for a period of low mood and exhaustion, in March of 1964. She gave birth to a son named Stephen. Her relationship with his father had already broken down, and her parents adopted the boy the following year. She worked in a home for the elderly. She moved to Portsmouth to stay with her older sister and met a young, able seaman in the Royal Navy named Roger Rivett. They married in Croydon in June of 1967. In 1973, he took a job on an oil tanker. When he came home, he grew suspicious about what she had been doing in his absence, and in May of 1974, he went to live with his parents. She signed on with a domestic agency in Belgravia and cared for an elderly couple in the district. Then she took a position with a family a few streets away on Lower Belgrave Street. Her parents later confirmed to police that she had been fond of the children and had worked well with Lady Lucan. She had been in the house a matter of weeks. The case. He could not win. Wardship is one of the older powers an English court holds, and it is not a small one. When a child is made a ward of court, the court itself becomes that child's guardian, After that, no parent can move the child, school the child, or take the child out of the country without the court's permission. In March of 1973, Lucan used that power to take his 3 children away from their mother, with 2 private detectives standing beside him on a London street. Veronica went straight to court to get them back. And here the case turned on something nobody had planned. The judge looked at what was in front of him, decided it was too tangled to resolve quickly, and listed a full hearing for June. 3 months away. She had 3 months to prepare, and she used every week of them. Her husband's entire case rested on a single proposition, that she was mentally incapable of raising her own children. So that spring, the Countess of Lucan booked herself into the Priory Clinic at Roehampton for 4 days and asked to be examined. The doctors reported back. She still needed some psychiatric support. There was no indication that she was mentally ill. That finding took the floor out from under him. The hearing ran for weeks behind closed doors, witness after witness, arguments that went on far past what anyone had expected. And as the days went on, the case quietly changed shape. It stopped being an examination of her condition and became an examination of his behavior toward her. He had come into that courtroom to prove his wife was unfit. He spent most of it defending himself. In the end, his own lawyers told him it was finished. On their advice, he conceded the case. Mr. Justice Rees, a High Court judge whose obituaries decades later would still mention this hearing, awarded custody of Francis, George, and Camilla to their mother. The Earl was granted access to his own children every other weekend. Every other weekend. That was what a marriage of not quite 10 years had come down to, and it was written into an order he had asked for himself. The bill came to something around £20,000. Read the outcome carefully, and it is stranger than I first took it to be. He did not lose this case. He surrendered it before the judge had to rule against him, on the advice of counsel who could see where it was going. For a man who had made his living reading a table, it was the one hand he refused to play out. I would call that the moment the whole story turns, and it happened in a room with no reporters in it. What followed was worse than the judgment. The dispute did not end when the court did. It spread outward through the couple's whole social world, pulling in friends on both sides, and eventually Veronica's own sister. People who had known them both for years found themselves asked to take a position on a marriage they had only ever seen from the outside. And the man himself began to come apart, visibly, to the people closest to him. He drank more than he had before. He started smoking one cigarette after another. His friends noticed, and some of them said so afterward. He had spent £20,000 to be told he could see his children 26 days a year. 4 overdrawn accounts. £2,841 at Coutts. £4,379 at Lloyd's. £1,290 at National Westminster. £5,667 at Midland. 4 banks, 4 overdrafts, not one positive balance among them. By the autumn of 1974, 4 sets of bank managers were asking the same questions about the same customer. What he had coming in, from various family trusts, was about £12,000 a year. That was the whole of it. Out of that, he had to live, pay his wife, service 4 overdrafts, and go on gambling. There is a letter from this period that only makes sense if you know something about his childhood. In 1939, aged 4, John Bingham and his older sister were sent out of London to Wales. The following year, joined by their 2 younger siblings, they were shipped across the Atlantic to Toronto and then down to Mount Kisco in New York State. They spent the next 5 years in the household of a wealthy American widow named Marcia Brady Tucker. He was enrolled at the Harvey School. His summers were spent at a camp in the Adirondacks, away from the others. They came home in February of 1945 to a country still on rationing. The family house on Cheney Walk had been bombed. The windows had been blown out of the house at Eaton Square. Their parents, earldom and all, were agnostics and socialists who preferred a plainer life than the one their children had just been living in America. The boy had nightmares afterward and was taken to a psychotherapist. 30 years later, ruined, it was Marcia Brady Tucker he wrote to. He asked her for a loan of £100,000. Nothing came. So he wrote to her son instead, and in that letter he set out what the money was for. He wanted to buy his children from his wife. Of everything I went through to make this film, that letter is the one that changed how I saw him. Not because it is cold, although it is, because of what it reveals about the way he had come to frame the problem. Custody was no longer a question of law or of fitness. It was a purchase, and the only obstacle was a sum he could not raise. So he raised what he could from everyone else. His mother lent him £4,000. The financier James Goldsmith guaranteed a £5,000 overdraft on his behalf, and that guarantee sat unpaid for years afterward. He applied to a discreet lender called the Edgware Trust and submitted his income details. They required a guarantor, and he came away with £3,000 of the £5,000 he had asked for. 3 nights before the murder, a friend of more than 10 years, the writer Taki Theodorakopoulos, put £3,000 in cash into his hands. All of it went the same way. Roy Ranson, the detective who would go on to run the investigation, later put a figure on the last stretch of it. In September and October of 1974 alone, he estimated, Lucan ran up close to £50,000 in fresh debt. By then, he was not even playing the big table. He had come down to far smaller stakes than he had once played for in Berkeley Square. The stakes had shrunk and the losses had not. What the ledger really shows is not a number. It is a man working steadily through every person in his life who might conceivably lend him something. He started with the woman who bore him and finished with a household in New York State that had taken him in as a refugee child. He reached the end of that list with nothing. What he said, over a drink. Men say things when they are drunk, and most of it means nothing at all. In the year after he lost the custody case, Lord Lucan said a number of things to his friends over drinks. Among the people who heard him were John Aspinall and Aspinall's mother, Lady Osborne. What he talked about was killing his wife. The fullest account of it came from a man named Greville Howard, who gave a statement to the police afterward. According to Howard, Lucan discussed how killing his wife might save him from bankruptcy. He discussed how her body might be disposed of in the Solent, and he said he would never be caught. Howard's own reading of the conversation was that it had been drunken rambling and nothing more. That statement was never put in front of the inquest jury. There is a reasonable case for why it should not have been. Howard did not go to the police at the time because he did not believe a word of it. Men in collapsing marriages say worse things at 2 a.m. across every city on earth. If bar talk were evidence, half of Mayfair would have been in the dock. What makes it harder to wave away is the detail. The Solent is the channel of water between Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Lucan raced powerboats. I would not want to push this further than the record allows. But a man inventing a story to shock his friends does not usually arrive at the practical question of where to put a body. And he does not land on a stretch of sea he had spent years driving across. Lady Osborne heard him on the subject too. Her son heard him. These were not strangers in a bar. They were the people who had known him longest. And then, in the last fortnight of October, something in him shifted. and 4 separate people noticed it. His best man, John Wilbraham, said the obsession about recovering the children seemed to have loosened its grip. At dinner with his mother, he pushed the family trouble aside altogether and talked politics instead. On the 6th of November, he saw his uncle, John Bevan, and came across as being in good spirits. Later that same day, he met a 21-year-old woman named Charlotte Andrina Colquhoun. She said afterward that he seemed very happy and entirely his usual self. There was nothing about him, she said, to suggest a man who was worried or low. That evening he ate at the Claremont with the racing driver Graham Hill. So which one of those men was the real one? I do not think the two are as far apart as they look. Under the licensing rules of the time, London casinos could only open between 2 in the afternoon and 4 in the morning. Lucan gambled. Into the small hours, took tablets for his insomnia, and usually surfaced around lunchtime. He had lived that way for the better part of 15 years, and for the whole of the last one he had been losing. A man in that state who suddenly relaxes has not necessarily found hope. He may simply have stopped seeing more than one option. The last 14 hours. Lord Lucan woke at lunchtime. That had been the pattern for years, built around a licensing law that kept the tables open until 4 in the morning. On November 7th, 1974, he was awake early and on the telephone to his solicitor. At 10:30, he took a call from Andrina Colquhoun, and they arranged to eat at the Claremont at around 3. He never came. She drove past the Claremont, past the Ladbroke, past Elizabeth Street, and could not spot his car anywhere. Earlier the same day, he had also missed a 1 o'clock lunch at the club with the artist Dominic Elwes and a banker named Daniel Meinertzhagen. 3 arrangements in a single day, and he kept none of them. At 4 in the afternoon, he walked into a chemist's shop on Lower Belgrave Street, a few doors from his wife's house. He put a small capsule on the counter and asked the pharmacist what it was. It was Limbitrol 5, prescribed for anxiety and low mood. He had done this several times since the separation, and he had never once said where the tablets came from. At 4:45, he telephoned a literary agent named Michael Hicks Beach. Between 6:30 and 7, the two of them met at Hicks Beach's flat in Elizabeth Street. Lucan wanted help with an article he had been commissioned to write for an Oxford University magazine. The subject of the article was gambling. I sat with that for a while. On the last afternoon of his life as a free man, with 4 overdrafts and a borrowed car outside, he was writing about how to gamble. He was doing it for a student magazine, unpaid. A few streets away, Sandra Rivette had her evening ahead of her. Thursday was normally her night off, and she normally spent it with her boyfriend, a man named John Hankins, that week. She had swapped days and had seen him the evening before. At around 8 o'clock, the two of them spoke on the telephone, and that is the last recorded call she made. At 8, Lucan drove Hicks Beach home. He did not take the Mercedes. He took an old, dark, shabby Ford Corsair, borrowed some weeks earlier from a friend named Michael Stoop. At 8:30, he rang the Claremont to check a dinner booking. Greville Howard had called him at 5:15 with the offer of a theatre ticket, which he had declined, proposing the club at 11 instead. When 11 came, he was not there, and the telephone in his flat rang out. What happened next took place inside number 46, and it takes up an hour of that evening that we have already walked through. By 10 o'clock, he was in Chester Square, a few streets from the house. A woman named Madeline Florman, whose daughter went to school with Francis, was alone at home when her doorbell rang. She ignored it. Shortly afterward, her telephone rang. The voice on the line was incoherent, and she put the receiver down. Bloodstains were later found on her doorstep. Analysis showed a mixture of two blood groups, A and B. Between 10:30 and 11, he telephoned his mother in St. John's Wood. He told her there had been a terrible catastrophe at his wife's house and asked her to fetch the children. He said he had been driving past when he saw Veronica struggling with a man in the basement, and that he had let himself in and found her screaming. Then he drove 42 miles south into Sussex to a house at Uckfield belonging to his friends Ian and Susan Maxwell Scott. Ian was away. Susan let him in and poured him a whiskey and water. He gave her the same account he had given his mother, with more in it. He had been passing the house, he said, and had seen a man attacking his wife through the basement window. He had gone in and slipped in blood at the bottom of the staircase. The man had run. Veronica had become hysterical and had accused him of hiring the man to kill her. She noticed that he was dishevelled and that there was a damp patch on the right hip of his trousers. He asked her for writing paper. He wrote 2 letters, both to his brother-in-law Bill Shand Kidd. The first repeated the story of the intruder and said the circumstantial evidence against him was strong because his wife would tell everyone it had been him. He wrote that he intended to lie doggo for a while. The only thing that mattered, he said, was the children. The second letter was about money. A sale was coming later that month, he wrote, which would satisfy the bank overdrafts. He signed that one, Lucky. A third letter went to Michael Stoop, the owner of the borrowed car, delivered to his club. In it, Lucan described a traumatic night of unbelievable coincidence and asked that his children be told that all he had ever cared about was them. He blamed a crooked solicitor and a rotten psychiatrist for destroying him. Stoop threw the envelope away, so nobody was ever able to check the postmark. At about 12:30, he telephoned his mother a second time. He said he would be in touch later in the day. A police constable was standing beside her, and Lucan declined to speak to him, saying he would call the police himself in the morning. At around 1:15, he walked out of the house at Uckfield and drove off into the dark. Susan Maxwell Scott was the last person to see him. Asked later why she had not immediately telephoned the police, she said she had seen no newspaper and no television news. She had heard no radio and had no idea that anything had happened. The Corsair was found on the 10th of November in Norman Road, New Haven, 16 miles from Uckfield. 2 witnesses put it there between 5 and 8 on the morning of the 8th. In the boot was a second piece of lead piping, wrapped the same way in surgical tape, and an unopened bottle of vodka. The vodka is the part I cannot place. A man planning to drown himself in the Channel does not usually pack a bottle and then leave it sealed. 31 minutes. 31 minutes. That is how long it took the jury. The inquest into the death of Sandra Rivet opened on the 13th of November, 1974, before Gavin Thurston, the coroner for Inner West London. 2 witnesses were heard that day. Roger Rivet, who confirmed that he had identified his wife's body, and the pathologist Keith Simpson, who confirmed she had died from a blow to the head with a blunt instrument. Thurston then adjourned at the request of the police and adjourned twice more. The full hearing did not open until the 16th of June, 1975. The reason for the delay is the strangest legal knot in the whole case, and it shaped everything that came after. Under the law as it stood, a wife was generally neither compellable nor competent to give evidence against her husband in a criminal trial. Veronica could have described being attacked. She could not have told a criminal jury what her husband said to her afterward about the nanny, because that was hearsay, and hearsay was barred from criminal courts. None of those rules applied in a coroner's court. There, she could say all of it. Thurston saw the trap clearly. If she gave the full account in his courtroom with reporters filling every seat, it might poison any trial that followed. So he waited, and waited again, and in the end accepted that no trial was ever going to come. When the full inquest opened, there were lawyers acting for several parties, including a barrister engaged on behalf of the missing Earl by his own mother. Thurston had selected 33 witnesses. Veronica came to court every day in a dark coat and a white headscarf. He questioned her about the marriage, about her finances, about how she had come to employ Sandra Rivet, and about the night itself. Counsel for the Dowager Countess tried to open up the question of whether she had hated her husband. Thurston ruled the line inadmissible and closed it down. A woman detective constable named Sally Blower read out a statement taken from Lady Frances Bingham the previous November. Frances was 10 years old. She had heard a scream. A few minutes later, she had watched her mother come into the room with blood on her face, and her father come in behind her. Her mother had sent her to bed. Later, she had heard her father calling out, asking where her mother was, and had seen him come out of the bathroom and go down the stairs. She also told police that the nanny did not usually work on Thursday nights. The landlord of the Plumber's Arms described what had come through his door on the 7th of November. But what settled the verdict was not a person. It was the building. Lucan's account required a man to have been in that basement and then to have got out of it. The basement's front door was locked. The rear door opened onto a walled garden with no sign of anyone having crossed it. Nobody in the street saw a man leave. There was no forced entry anywhere, apart from the door the police themselves had kicked in. His account also required him to have seen the struggle from the street. Officers went to Lower Belgrave Street and tried it. The only way to see into that basement from the pavement was to crouch almost to the ground, and the room was dark because the bulb was sitting on a chair. Veronica said she had never entered the basement at all that night, which contradicted his version outright, and the blood pattern analysis supported her. The forensic evidence closed the gaps. The pipe from the house carried blood from both groups A and B, and hair resembling hers. The pipe from the car carried neither. Government scientists thought it likely both had been cut from the same length, though they could not prove it. The letters to Shand Kid were stained with blood believed to have come from both women. The letter to Stoop was written on paper torn from a pad found in that same car boot. His fingerprints were not found at the scene. I mention that because it is the one point his defenders have always leaned on, and it is worth being straight about. It was his family home for 7 years. Fingerprints would have proved almost nothing either way. Thurston summed up and told the jury what verdicts were open to them. At 11:45, the foreman stood and gave it. Murder by Lord Lucan. He became the first member of the House of Lords named as a murderer since 1760, when Lawrence Shirley, the 4th Earl Ferrers, was hanged for killing his bailiff. He was also the last person in English legal history to be committed by a coroner to the Crown Court for unlawful killing. Parliament stripped coroners of that power with the Criminal Law Act of 1977, and this case was part of the reason. Which leaves something I still cannot get past. The only court that ever formally named Sandra Rivet's killer had no power to punish anybody. It was sitting in judgment on a man who was not in the country and possibly not alive. The Wall. By the afternoon of the 8th of November, the early editions were out, and photographs of the Earl and Countess of Lucan filled the front pages. One headline described a body in a sack and a countess running into the street screaming. Others simply reported that a murder had happened in Belgravia and that an earl was being sought. That same day, at the Claremont Club in Berkeley Square, 6 men met. John Aspinall was there. So were Daniel Meinertzhagen, Bill Shand Kidd, Dominic Elwes, Charles Benson, and Stephen Raphael. Meinert Hagen and Raphael always maintained afterward that it had been nothing more than worried friends pooling what little they knew. The police did not read it that way. Relations between the Metropolitan Force and Lucan's social circle went downhill fast, and some officers complained openly that an Eton mafia was working against them. Susan Maxwell Scott declined to add anything further to her statement. Detectives asked Lady Osborne, Aspinall's mother, whether she could help them locate the body. The last she had heard, she told them, he was being fed to the tigers at her son's zoo. They took it seriously enough to search the house and the animal cages. Over the following weeks, they searched 14 country houses and estates, including Holcombe Hall and Warwick Castle. None of it turned up a thing. What happened next was not really about a murder at all. It became a fight about class, and the timing of it could hardly have been worse. 1974 had opened with the 3-day week. From the 1st of January, commercial users of electricity were limited to 3 specified days and forbidden from making up the hours. Industrial output fell by roughly a fifth. Close to 1 million workers were temporarily laid off. Television was ordered off the air at 10:30 at night. Edward Heath called a general election in February and fought it on one question: who governs Britain? He lost. Harold Wilson formed a minority government, settled with the miners, and went back to the country in October for a majority of 3. That made 2 general elections inside 8 months, in a year when inflation ran above 17% and bombs were going off on the British mainland. Across the Atlantic that August, an American president had resigned. Historians looking back have called it the worst year Britain had seen since the war. Into the middle of that walked an Earl who, by the account almost everyone accepts, had killed a working woman from Croydon by mistake. Around him stood a circle of rich men who would not tell the police anything. A Labour member of Parliament, Marcus Lipton, said publicly that certain people were being a bit snooty with the police. Charles Benson wrote to the Times demanding that Lipton either name them or take it back. Private Eye printed a claim that James Goldsmith had been at the Claremont meeting. He had not. He was in Ireland at the time. In 1976, Goldsmith began a libel action against the magazine, and I want to be plain about why that matters here. The theory that this circle helped their friend escape has been argued for 50 years. It has never been proved, and the one time a magazine put a name to it in print, the man sued. One person did break ranks. Dominic Elwes went to the hospital to see Veronica and came away shaken by how she looked and by what she said to him. He was unhappy at the way the press were treating her, and he afterward cooperated with an article in the Sunday Times magazine that was critical of Lucan. His friends cut him off for it. He died in September of 1975. The newspapers had no such hesitation. Leader writers across the national press ignored the libel risk entirely and named Lucan as the killer. Then the accounts arrived. In August of 1975, as the bankruptcy went through, his creditors were told what was left: unsecured debts of £45,000, preferential liabilities of £1,326, assets valued at £22,632. In March of 1976, the family silver went to Christie's and sold for something near £30,665. The Lucan Family Trust paid off the remainder, and a figure of £60,000 was reported in 1979. Which brings me to the thing I find hardest to sit with in this whole story. The debts were settled. The title survived. The trust held. In the end, the family lost the silver, and a man nobody could find, and that was the extent of it. There was never a body. Roy Ranson believed early on that Lucan had killed himself somewhere near New Haven, and he wanted the downs above the town searched properly. He was told that a search on that scale was not possible. They managed a partial one with tracker dogs, and the only thing the dogs turned up was the skeleton of a judge who had disappeared years before. Police divers went into the harbour. The following year, they tried infrared photography across the ground. Nothing came of either. A warrant for his arrest, for the murder of Sandra Rivett and the attempted murder of his wife, was issued on the 12th of November. His description went to Interpol. Then the sightings began, and in 50 years they have never entirely stopped. One of the first turned out to be John Stonehouse, a British politician who had faked his own death and was picked up on the other side of the world. Officers flew to France in the summer of 1975 and came back with nothing. A sighting in Colombia proved to be an American businessman. In 1982, a bounty hunter who had once seized the train robber Ronnie Biggs announced he had captured Lucan, and a newspaper exposed him as a hoaxer. 21 years later, a former Scotland Yard detective traced the Earl to Goa, where the man he had found was Barry Halpin, a folk singer from Merseyside. Reporters in New Zealand interviewed a homeless British expatriate in 2007. Then, in 2020, a professor of computer science announced that facial recognition software had positively identified an elderly man living in a Buddhist community in suburban Brisbane. A second firm ran the same comparison and concluded the opposite. In April of 2021, after inquiries by the Australian Federal Police on behalf of the Metropolitan Police, that man was conclusively eliminated from the investigation. His friends had always said he was dead. Aspinall believed Lucan was guilty and had drowned himself at sea. Veronica said he had died like the nobleman he was. She waved away the sightings, saying he was not the sort of Englishman who could have coped abroad. Ranson eventually changed his own mind and came to think the Earl had reached southern Africa. A former detective inspector said he had been ordered to drop an African lead in the 1980s. The paperwork took 42 years. He was presumed dead in chambers in December of 1992 and declared legally dead in October of 1999. Even so, no death certificate was issued, and his son was refused permission to take the title. After the Presumption of Death Act of 2013, George Bingham went back to the High Court. On the 3rd of February 2016, the certificate was granted. He became the 8th Earl of Lucan at 48. His mother explained the long delay simply enough. If his father had been pronounced dead sooner, death duties would have consumed the money that was paying for the children's schooling. And then there is Veronica. She fell into a dependence on the antidepressants she had been prescribed. In 1982, her 3 children went to live with her sister and Bill Shand Kidd. From some point in that decade, she was estranged from all 3 of them for the rest of her life. She stayed around the corner from number 46 in a leased property held by a Lucan trust for more than 30 years. In 2016, she tried to sell private film footage of her husband because she needed the money. She died in September of 2017, aged 80. Her will left everything to Shelter, the homeless charity. She wrote about the lack of good manners and reverence her 3 children had shown her. She did not wish any of them to benefit from her death any more than they had to. Her son said publicly that he applauded the decision. All 3 of them came to the service. Sandra Rivett's body was held for several weeks and then released to her family. She was cremated at Croydon on the 18th of December, 1974. Her elder son, Stephen, was raised by her parents. A second son, born in 1966 and given up for adoption, spent more than 30 years without knowing who his mother was. He finally opened the envelope his adoptive mother had left him. He learned that she was the nanny in a case that had been on British front pages since before he could read. He has spent the years since pressing to have it reopened. The inquiry into her death remains open. What stays with me, after all of it, is the arithmetic of the attention. Lord Lucan became a joke in Britain, the punchline about anyone who cannot be found. 50 years of newspapers, films, dramas, an industry built on a missing aristocrat. The woman he killed was 29 years old, worked for wages, and had given up 2 children she could not afford to raise. I do not think he deserves the mystery. I think she deserves the name.